The land issue, which mentioned by Dr. Hauke, of course, every war, every violence, right, starting from the Mahabharata, of course, the consent, the focus is that. But when we talk about in the context of Manipur, the issue is about the all of a sudden the influx of illegal the migrants who came and who started dominating the hills area. At the same time, they are expanding to the foothills and approaching. So all this basically complicated the things. What we all should know is that there must be always something a balanced approach. So when the balance is disturbed, so definitely this kind of issue erupted. And the current violence is simply one of that example. Here, for the Meitei, we all know now that Meitei are restricted to the valley lands. And Meitei have been one of the aboriginal people or the community of this land. And now what we see is that the Meitei is facing serious issue because of the changes in the geopolitical system, including the Myanmar, including the state itself, the changes of the demography, the changes of the kind of the transnational development, like we are now coming, the railways will soon it reach to the Imphal, the valley. Then there is a plan for Trans-Asia highways and putting all these things. Now there is a serious threat. And again, the population of Meitei is almost stagnant, or some experts say that it is in the declining. So there it comes that a strong insecurity to the Meitei, that if there is no proper constitutional protection given to Meitei, then Meitei will face a serious challenge, and maybe in the coming few decades, Meitei will be extinct from their own homeland. So the immigrant community, at the same time, we have now come to know that it's a 395 kilometer, it's a international boundary shared with Manipur and the Myanmar, and hardly 10 kilometer after such a long independence, just 10 kilometer of border fencing have been completed, another 80 kilometer. Home Minister ji said that he has given the approval. But during this process, there are already a huge amount of illegal immigrants entered. And because of this, what I said, that complete imbalance happened. So this is a very deep-rooted problem. This is a very complicated problem. So that's why I say it is not just all party meet today will just bring the normalcy, will just bring the peace in the state, but it requires a very honest and sincere efforts, collective efforts, how to address this deep-rooted, complicated problem. For the Meitei, if you see the overall, the valley, for the past maybe 8 to 9 years, we see that it's not only valley, the entire, the state, you see that, okay, the blockades have been reduced, there's no much fun at all there. But at the same time, when you see that the Meitei, for them, the opportunity for them is slowly, it's shrinking. So it's a big, they feel that it's a big threat to them. And if this is not addressed by the government, then the problem will escalate higher and higher. That's what I said. It needs a special focus on the issue of Manipur. It is not just one of the incident happened in a remote state. This has already become a serious issue to the national security also. It may become a national security threat. We have already seen that due to this violence, now these drug routes, the carrying of these drug routes, the transportation, the routes, now it is transferred to Mizoram route. It's very
Okay.
much alarming.
Okay.
It's very much alarming. I want
Okay.
to say these few points at this moment.
Okay, Rani, there's a sociological question for you. I thought, I'll ask you. I'll reserve it for you. Rami, sociologically, in 60s there was a theory in context of New York called melting pot. Now, a lot of sociologists, anthropologists argued, no, in modernity does not create melting pot. It creates a salad bowl. You keep your identity, but you're still part of that salad bowl. Manipur that way, unfortunately, defines both salad bowl and a melting pot, and identities have hardened. There is no emphasis on common cultural identity. Yesterday, I was with Dr. Ramesh and I said, why isn't like Iromba? Iromba is a Manipuri dish. And the way Iromba used to be cooked 400 years ago is different from Iromba today, because now the chili has been added to Iromba. The potatoes from the New World has been added to Iromba. So Iromba, it's like a meat preparation. 500 years ago there was no peppercorn, but now 500 years later the same mutton preparation might have pepper and chilies. So it's like you have a common changing cultural identity. Why isn't that there in Manipur? It just baffles me.
Karthikeya, just point aside when you said, it's like modernity makes a melting point, just a thought on that we've always considered modernity in reference of westernization, and that has usually come in from the cultural representations of the West. And I think the idea of modernity in a civilization like ours that has always evolved and always adjusted itself to its new environment is completely different to what anthropologists and sociologists considered. Having said that, Iramba is a great, it's a great analogy to what's happening because, at the end of the day, I'll tell you something. If we were to go by the local committee report, which characterizes what tribes should, the characteristics that a tribe should have to be included in a tribal list, let me tell you, majority of the tribes will not exist in that list. So this is in reference to what Dr. Haukip said about the fact that tribes have a very close identity to their land. The fact of the matter is that it's not just the tribes, it's populations who have lived in these lands, who have lived in these communities for as long as history can remember. And if we were ready to go by what constitutes a tribe and what doesn't constitute a tribe, then majority of the tribes, with the exception of some very remote tribes in let's say the Andamans, would not would not fall into these parameters. So I think the problem that has happened is that we've hardened our view basis of what suits us. It's not basis of what is rational. I don't think, and I've said this more times than not openly, that I don't think that one can deny the legitimate right the Meiteis have to demand for tribal inclusion. And anybody who thinks otherwise is being a hardliner, is being fairly irrational in my point of view. And I'm also sure that that is not the point of view of all other communities, all people who are in those communities, except, there's always one layer of people who believe in a hardliner thought. And that is what brings in these deficits because, these are communities that have lived side by side. Yes, there have been skirmishes. These are historical problems, but to come to this point to say that the other person does not even have the constitutional right to demand for something, to me is fairly irrational. And I have no cream in this debate in terms of I'm neither a Naga, neither a Kuki, neither a Meitei, this is just a question of, just looking at things logically. Everybody will have to cede space. Everybody will have to look at the situation from the other point of view. Otherwise, there are going to be no long-term solutions. You can keep being a hardliner and you can keep seeing the after effects of that on your state. Who else is it impacting? It's impacting you. To come to some mutual consensus, one has to soften their stance, and one has to also adapt to the environment. Now, there are legitimate fears here. We've already established, and right at the beginning of this series of debates that you've been having a month ago, there were people on your debate that flatly denied any infiltration. When I said that there was Bhatt infiltration into the state, today it has become clear that there is infiltration. Now, that infiltration causes a demographic imbalance. It also causes legitimate fears in terms of marginalization, in terms of equitable sort of access to resources. And why should one not see it from the point of view of the person who is feeling marginalized? So I think, like you said, that flavors have been added, and things have changed to a dish that is so ancient. It's been done so because palates have changed and expectations have changed, and resources have become more available, flavors have become more available. The same way in this situation, the world is looking at India is looking at different parameters. The Northeast is looking at itself to be defined by different parameters, not by instability, not by insecurity. And if that has to be achieved, then that has to be achieved with, some sort of mutual understanding and, some sort of taking a step backward from any sort of hardliner view.
A lot of our guests, they use this word aboriginal. We are the original. Who is original? Sometimes I feel Rami is the king of Tripura. The dynasty, is that original because they came 600 years ago? Who is original? That really sometimes make me think. Today what America is, India was 1,000 years ago. I shouldn't be saying that India was America 1,000 years ago. What I mean is that if you look at the story of Malik Amber, a slave who becomes a king in the Deccan 400 years ago, it just goes on to show that the sort of movement of humanity in the Indian subcontinent was substantial, Rami.
Karthikeya, that is a brilliant statement to make. It's a brilliant point to bring out about what an aboriginal is, because you'll be surprised to know that words like tribe, aborigine, animism was only included by the British in some of the early census. This wasn't a part of our civilizational mainstream consciousness, these sort of divisions. So Aboriginal also in Australia, it's used, because it was, the subjects that were used to define societies were anthropology and sociology, which were colonial arms. So they were Aboriginal for them because they came in as invaders. In a country like India, there is, in my opinion, no Aboriginal. Of course, people can debate, debate no end on this. But, to me, these are communities that have lived side by side. Boundaries have been drawn, borders have been drawn, and badly so, much later. So to look at somebody from this insider-outsider perspective, we defeat our own purpose of looking at ourselves as a unified population. Having said that, ever since the Union of India has existed, there have been rules and regulations, and that rule of law has to be followed. And any sort of illegal infiltration and migration into this country now can be seen as illegal. But to get into this debate of who is indigenous, who is Aboriginal, we are using the same colonial lens that the colonialists used, at us to divide our society. So, that point being made clear, I think, these are words that we should use with great amount of restraint.